Let's get back into the Socratic Ducky. We are reading Chapter 15, The Science Behind Birthday Cake. This is where we're kind of going to put the rubber to the road, as it were. Getting real. Not long ago, we had hiked to the end of the metaphysical map and discovered that knowing and believing are impossible to separate, like duct tape and leg hair. Along the way, we examined one of the biggest opponents to this idea, which is the position declaring science to be the only real way to discover truth. And of course, I pointed out that if you choose this position, it will not be based on scientific evidence. Sometimes the reasons which compel me to take a side in a debate are not hard to comprehend, and this is one of those times. Behold the metaphysical map. The first flaw in the pro-science, anti-religion movement is trying to define knowledge not only as completely isolated from belief, but as its enemy. Flaw number 2 is they don't know the boundaries of science. Dictionary.com says science is systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. Systematic means it is controlled and repeatable, not freak accidents or single events that only happen once, or as Harry Carey used to say, Cubs win! But I digress. For instance, if you want to prove what temperature water boils at, you can put some water in a container and heat it up until it boils. Then to be sure it always boils at the same temperature because it's a property of water, you can try it in different containers. In glass, it boils at 110 degrees Celsius. Actually 212 degrees American. In a metal container, it does the same. If there's no container, your water will put out the fire and not heat up to 100 degrees. If you hold it in your hands, you'll burn yourself very badly and still won't have conclusive results. All of these are repeatable, though some you'll learn not to do again. This is the only way that science works. It determines what will happen by watching it happen over and over and over and over until they've used all of their funding or get sick to death of burning their hands and just decide to use glass containers. If a team of scientists heated water to 100 degrees and instead of it boiling, a rainbow pony appeared and gave each of them a croissant, this would not be a scientific discovery. They would probably assume it to be some elaborate practical joke. It would not have a scientific explanation, and if I were them, I would be hesitant about eating that croissant. You're probably familiar with crime scene forensic shows because all of those shows are competing for the coveted WCSNDBA, the Who Can Show the Nastiest Dead Bodies Award. If the scientists on those shows ran their investigations on pure materialistic science, they would always discover that the deceased died of natural causes. The evidence tells us he was shot 16 times, they would say to each other, so naturally he would die. There is nothing supernatural about a man falling dead when his chest is pierced by 16 bullets, so this was death by natural causes. And then they declare the case closed and go have lunch. Observational science is the science of observations. If it can't be seen, touched, or measured, it can't be scienced. This kind of science can only prove what can be objectively studied under controlled and repeatable conditions. Over the past 200 years, enough evidence has been compiled to support the idea that when a man is shot a bunch of times, he dies. That's science. But science cannot prove who did that shooting or why. An event of the past cannot be scientifically proven. For that, you'd have to build a time machine and go back to the actual event and watch it occur and take measurements while it's happening. And who has that kind of time or the budget for a TARDIS? For a past event, you have to use what is called legal historical proofs. This is what CSI teams actually do. CSI here is crime scene investigation, like on TV. It's also what historians and courtrooms do. They have used science to know that a body full of bullets must have been shot by some bullet-shooting weapon, because no one can throw them that hard. They could also argue scientifically that a gun will not shoot itself at someone by itself. A shooting requires a shooter. To prove who that one shooter was, this one past event requires legal historical proof, the kind that gets used in the trial to establish reasonable doubt or guilt. By gathering information of this kind, they can establish a reasonable faith in a possible past event. This evidence gives them faith that their belief is well-founded, but it is important to make the distinction between what is observed directly and what is determined by what can be observed directly. Let me say that again because I feel like I stumbled. The evidence gives them faith that their belief is well-founded. But it is important to make the distinction between what is observed directly and what is determined after the fact by what can be observed directly. One is the eyewitness, the other is Sherlock Holmes. Here's a personal example for you. Think of the date you were born, day, month, year. Got that in your head? Okay. Now, if I were to ask you, if you know the day you were born, you would probably say yes. Let's assume I asked you and you said yes. Like, hey, you know what day you were born? Yeah. Okay, great. Now let's assume I follow up with this. Prove it! Can you prove what day you were born on? Obviously, you can't do this with science. There's nothing that can be tested in a lab over and over which will tell us that. We can't observe you being born. It's already happened. But wait, it gets weirder. I'm going to show you that you know what day you were born because you believe things you cannot prove. I'm going to take a wild guess and assume you don't know your birthday because you remember being born. You should be thankful for that. So what proof do you have? Well, you have a birth certificate, of course. There's all the proof you need. A government document created in some cases many decades ago. How can any legal document be wrong? Can a legal document be wrong? Well, yeah, it happens all the time. Okay, but didn't your parents and the doctor all sign that document? Right? They agreed to the date and the time and they wrote it down. Isn't that proof? It sure is, provided you take into account that all three of them were pretty preoccupied by the fact that a tiny baby was being born, and maybe you don't know this, but it could be a very distracting event. And odds are that none of them had gotten a good enough sleep in the past 24 hours. How do you know they signed it on the day it says? What if the whole thing is fake? Like they just forgot. Like, isn't it possible all three of them forgot to do the paperwork and then sometime in the next few months they all said, I don't know, let's just call it the 14th. It was somewhere around there because I hadn't gotten paid yet, but it was after that game where the Phillies beat the Sox. Can you prove this is not the case? Not with observational science, you can't. Okay, your birthday. Every year they celebrate it on the same day. Clearly that is proof that you were born on the day you think you were, unless they were wrong in the first place, or if they honestly didn't know and just made something up. Of course, how old were you when you were capable of knowing what day it was? Are you sure your parents didn't celebrate your birthday on a different day every year until you were 7? Quick, what's today's date? Haha, most of you had to check, admit it. I had to check. I have no idea. All right, to prove the validity of this possibility, I present a true story, which you will think I am making up, but I am not. A friend and coworker told me the story of how she found her true birthday. Sometime in her adult years, by which I mean her 40s, the woman she had known her whole life as her mother told her, Honey, I need to tell you something. I don't actually know your birthday. She was shocked. Did her mother, her own mother, not know the day her own daughter was born? She did not, as she was not there. Already you're at the end of the story. Surely she was adopted and maybe the birth certificate was lost. No, she had a birth certificate. It's weirder than that. She had been kidnapped and the birth certificate was a fake. This woman had kidnapped my friend as an infant from the hospital where she was born and made a fake birth certificate to cover her tracks. I know, right? Can you imagine? Don't you feel like you need to lay down and eat ice cream? Just to stop the world from spinning? Thought it was her mom. 40 years! Eventually, my friend was able to go to the hospital where she was born and using legal historical proofs, discover who her real birth mother was. She was in her 40s before she discovered not only her real mother, but her real birthday. She would have said she knew the date she was born, but for more than 40 years, she was wrong. Which brings me back to you. If you wish to say you know the day you were born on, you need to know that the date you've been told is true. You need to know that your birth certificate is not only real but accurate, and you have to know that your parents aren't a couple of kidnappers and liars. I haven't met your parents, but I think there's at least a moderate reason to believe they're not kidnappers. But ask them sometime, see what they say. I hope I have shown you that how what you know depends on what you choose to believe. Faith and science are not enemies, but the best of friends. Belief and knowledge are two sides of the same metaphysical nickel. If your science tries to exist without faith, you're only lying to yourself. And if your faith runs contrary to reasonable evidence, logic, and science, what makes it worth believing? Think about it, won't you? While you do that, I'm going to go have an ice cream sandwich, which is completely true, even though I don't have any scientific evidence for it. I've given up on scientific evidence, at least for now. At least until the burns on my hands heal. And I am not eating that croissant.
Jesus loves you is the message we send. Thanks for letting me be your rental friend. You're listening to Rent a Friend Radio.